This tutorial is to help you identifying angle pair relationships, and we're going to review some of the vocabulary associated with that for our mile marker practice 1. Let's begin with reviewing vertical angles. Hopefully this is one of our easier angle pairs to identify because we started talking about them in our first unit this year. So vertical angles is one of the 4 congruent angle pair relationships. And remember, what we're looking for is angles that share the same vertex, and they're going to be congruent to each other. So we have several pair of vertical angles here. Angles 2 and 3 are vertical to one another. Likewise, angles 6 and 7 are vertical to one another. We'll talk about some other relationships later, but these 4 angles are actually all congruent to one another. And 2 and 6 and 2 and 7 are related in a different way than 2 and 3 are. Now we still have 2 more pair of vertical angles. So angle 1 is vertical to angle 4. And I'm giving those different markings because angles 1 and 4 are not congruent to 2 and 3 or 6 and 7. And then angles 5 and 8 are also vertical angles. Next, we're going to talk about alternate interior angles. So let's consider the words alternate and interior. The word alternate is going to refer to which sides of the transversal our angles are on. So in this diagram, the line that's labeled N is our transversal. And when we say alternate angles, we're talking about an angle from one side of the transversal and the other. So in this case, I might think of it as like left and right of the transversal, but depending on the orientation of this picture, it might not always be left and right. It could be up and down. So it just depends on how the picture is oriented. Let's go ahead and talk about the word interior in this context. So interior is referring to whether the angles are between the 2 parallel lines or on the outside of the 2 parallel lines. Let's go ahead and identify some angles. We're always going to see 2 pair of alternate interior angles when we have this situation where there's exactly 2 parallel lines cut by a transversal. Sometimes we'll see something more complex than this. So let's look at angle 3. Angle 3 is on the inside of the 2 parallel lines, so it is an alternate interior angle with angle 6. Now there's another pair, and that's going to be angle 4 and angle 5. But what's really important that we understand here is that angles 3 and 4 are not alternate interior to each other. They're a linear pair, and we'll talk about that later. So again, it's a relationship between 2 angles, in this case 4 and 5, and 3 and 6. Now, you might have heard of the z-test. One thing you might notice is that when we're looking at alternate interior angles, if you trace them, they'll usually form a Z. So if I kind of trace these 2 angles in the diagram, I can see there's a Z or a backward Z if I trace these angles from C to D, so from one to the other. Our next relationship is similar to the one before, but now we're talking about alternate exterior angles. All right, so again, we're talking about angles that'll be on alternate or opposite sides of the transversal, but this time we're going to look at the 4 angles on the exterior of the parallel lines. So 1 and 2 and 7 and 8 in this example. We're going to have 2 different pair of alternate exterior angles, so let's just start with angle number 1. So if angle number 1 is up here, to find its alternate exterior, I want to get to the other side of the transversal and also the other exterior. So angles 1 and 8 are alternate exterior angles. Angle 2 It's not congruent to angles 1 or 8, so I'm using different markings. Again, I'm now on, in this case, what we might call the right side of the transversal. I want to alternate sides and then also alternate to the other parallel line. And angle 7 is an alternate exterior angle to angle 2. Our last angle relationship, we're going to see 4 different pair of corresponding angles. So corresponding, this is another pair that I think is not too difficult to identify. If you imagine that we were to translate line L down so that it was laying on top of line M, the angles that would then be on top of each other are what we call corresponding angles. So if I look in the top left up here is angle 1, and if I translated this parallel line down, angle 1 and 5 would be laying on top of each other. So that's going to be one pair of corresponding angles. If we look at angle 2, we can see that it's in the top right, and down here angle 6 is in the top right if we're just looking at angles 5, 6, 7, and 8. So 2 and 6 are corresponding angles. Angle 3 corresponds with angle 7. And last but not least, we could identify that angles 4 and 8 are corresponding. All of the angle pair relationships we've talked about until now were congruent relationships. These last 3 are all going to be how supplementary angles are related. So one that should be not too difficult to start off with is linear pairs. We've studied linear pairs again since our first unit, and we said the difference between a linear pair and just any supplementary pair of angles is that in a linear pair, the 2 angles share a vertex and a common side, and we can observe that the side of an angle is also a ray. So we're really going to have 8 pair of linear pairs in this scenario. I'm not going to draw them all out because I think that'll just make our diagram look more confusing. But if we look, angle 1, if we look at angle 1, it's going to have a linear pair in both angles 2 and in angle 3. So we really only want to consider one pair at a time. So if we just consider angles 1 and 2 for a moment, we can observe again that they share a vertex and they share a common ray. And then we know they're supplementary because the 2 sides of the angles that are not shared, so this one in angle 2, form a straight line. Angles 1 and 3 also make a straight line. So you're going to have lots of sets of linear pairs, 2 and 4, 4 and 3, 5 and 6, 5 and 7, 6 and 8, and so on. In our next angle pair relationship, we're talking about same side interior angles. So now we're talking about angles that are on the same side of the transversal, but are also in between or on the interior of the 2 parallel lines. So let's take a look. Angle 3, that is a same side interior angle to angle 5. So I'm going to use the same color so that we can see that they're same side interior angles, but I'm using 2 different symbols because they're not congruent. Remember, this is a supplementary angle pair. Then if we take a look at the other pair of same side we have, angle 6 is going to be same side interior to angle 4. So again, 6 and 4 are not congruent, they're supplementary and they're same side interior angles. Last but not least, we are talking about same side exterior angles. So again, an angle pair of angles that are on the same side of the transversal, which is N, but exterior the parallel lines. So we said 1 and 2 and 7 and 8, these are exterior angles. So if we can look at that, let's start with angle 1. Angle 1 is going to be same side exterior to angle 7. Again, I'm going to use different markings here because they are not congruent, but the same color because I want to show that those are the angles that are related. Angle 2 is going to be same side exterior to angle 8. So again, that means angles 2 and 8 are supplementary. You've made it to the end of the video. I'm going to leave you with this thought as you are preparing to study for mile marker 1.